Coming up. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, that's nuts, and you'd be right. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? First of all, I want to mention again an article I wrote on redstate.com on July 4 entitled Employers Threaten Conservative Speech, Thought, and Expression. If you haven't read it already, after you listen to this episode, be sure to check it out. Just search in Google for Red State and Franklin Rye, and it'll come up. Let's talk for a moment about what we aren't being told by the media, and the context of these comments is COVID-19. So, yeah, I can go on that issue for about 20 episodes, but I'm not going to. Let's talk briefly about one issue. We are being told about the high occupancy level of intensive care units, ICUs, all around the country. We're breathlessly told that some of them are above 90% of capacity. I've seen some recent articles, for example, that talked about some local ICUs at 93% of capacity. Now, think for a moment about responsible reporting. What is the information you need to be able to evaluate a claim? If you were writing an episode of Mythbusters about, for example, whether gas water heaters were more dangerous than electric water heaters, you'd want to know about how many people die each year from water heater explosions or electrocutions or other malfunctions, and then you'd probably set up some over-the-top water heater explosion that you could replay from multiple angles, but you'd need the data to reach a conclusion. We're being told about ICUs filling up. We are being told about how close they are to capacity now. What aren't we being told? We aren't being told how close to capacity they normally are. So without having that information, how on earth can we evaluate whether their proximity to capacity now is concerning? When I see an ICU listed as above 90% capacity, I assume that's unusual and very concerning. Is it? I did a search on Google about how close to being full ICUs in the U.S. are typically, and I was inundated with articles about COVID-19 and intensive care units being overwhelmed with COVID patients across the U.S. Article after article talked about hospitals with ICUs that were nearly full or hospitals where the staff were concerned about the ICUs becoming full. What I couldn't find was an article talking about how full the ICUs are in a typical year. So I redid my search by using a custom time frame starting in 2018 and ending in 2019. That eliminated all of the COVID articles, and then I found something that fit with what I expected. I found an article on reliasmedia.com by Elaine Chen, MD, entitled ICU Bed Availability, Does It Make a Difference? Among other things, the article addressed whether hospitals were more likely to be assigning patients to ICUs if the ICUs had low occupancy rates and were less likely to assign them if they had high occupancy rates. During the course of addressing that issue, the article disclosed that the subject hospital used for the examination had a 91% average occupancy in the ICU. You heard that right, a 91% average occupancy. Prior to COVID, if anyone had told me that a hospital had a 91% average occupancy in their ICU, I would have thought that had to be wrong. Now I would think, based on news coverage, well, of course, it's because of COVID. But this was before COVID, and it fits with something I heard on the radio that I haven't been able to confirm with any recent articles. And that is a claim that many intensive care units have average occupancies in a typical year of 90% or more. So, for example, if you hear that a local ICU is being hammered by COVID because it has a 93% occupancy, that might only mean it's up a point or two. Do a little more digging and you'll find that in Florida, UF Health hospitals in Jacksonville in a typical year are at 70% of capacity in the ICU, but in winter, that increases to 80 to 85%. You'll also find in Florida, ICUs are now on average at around 85% capacity. Is that a problem? Yes. Is it catastrophically above the norm as you'd think based on media coverage now? No. Could it reach that level? Yes, of course it could. But the frustrating thing is that the media continues to fail to do its job. It fails to provide accurate info and perspective, and as always, we're left having basically obtained a hunting license by having access to the internet. And every evening, if we can find the time, we can go hunting for the full story. Or, of course, you can wait for me to fill you in once per week. Next topic. Media claims Trump used Nazi symbol. So while we're on the subject of the media, let's talk briefly about the latest evidence of Trump derangement syndrome in the news. Did you see the story about President Trump reportedly using a Nazi symbol in a campaign ad and USA Today fact-checking the claim and concluding it was true? Okay, now campaigns can make mistakes, but an American presidential campaign using a Nazi symbol in an ad? Really? And USA Today fact-checking it and concluding the claim that they did was true? Really? I've seen some campaign screw-ups over the years, but this one seems so absurd that I really couldn't believe it. And guess what? My skepticism was well-founded. You want to know what the purported Nazi symbol was? It was an eagle. You heard that right, an eagle. Like the eagle you'll find on the U.S. Marine Corps emblem or on military retirement papers or on the letterhead of multiple federal agencies, like the Department of State and the Department of Defense. There's an eagle on the seal of the President of the United States. There's a silver eagle representing the rank of colonel in the U.S. Army and Air Force. It's why when I was a kid I learned to refer to that rank as opposed to lieutenant colonel as bird colonel. Because with that rank, you earned the eagle to designate you were a full colonel, a bird colonel. Imagine my shock when I was a kid if a USA Today reporter had told me, assuming just for a moment that they existed when I was a kid, that eagle is a Nazi symbol. I would have told them they were out of their minds and probably thrown my bendable rubber Pokey and Gumby toys at them. Fair warning, that'll be the last outdated pop culture reference proving I'm over the hill for this episode at least. So how on earth could USA Today conclude that the eagle is a Nazi symbol? Well, the Nazis did use eagles in some of their national displays and propaganda, but of course the U.S. government was using the eagle in its displays long before the Nazis chose to do so. Moreover, unlike the eagle the Nazis used, the U.S. eagle is the bald eagle. So is USA Today saying that all those federal agencies are using Nazi symbols? No. The argument that the Trump campaign used a Nazi symbol is because the Nazi eagle was often depicted above a circular field with the swastika in it. The Trump campaign depicted the eagle, the bald eagle, by the way, above a circular field with the American flag in it. So now, even if you use an eagle which is not the kind of eagle the Nazis used, apparently according to USA Today, if you depict it over a circle and the circle contains the American flag, it's a Nazi symbol, notwithstanding that it's the wrong type of bird and it displays the American flag, the symbol of our country, rather than a swastika. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, that's nuts, and you'd be right. Incidentally, the U.S. Marine Corps symbol that I referenced shows the eagle depicted above a circular image, in this case a globe with an anchor behind it. I'd like to see a USA Today reporter tell a U.S. Marine in uniform that he's sporting a Nazi symbol. Something tells me that reporter might be worried he'd get hit with something more than a rubber Pokey and Gumby. Okay, I lied earlier. That wasn't my last outdated pop culture reference for this episode. Perhaps you're wondering how, even in this crazy anti-Trump atmosphere in the media, USA Today could reach such an absurd conclusion? After all, they're bad, but they're not MSNBC or the Daily Kos. Well, here's the game that USA Today played. They couched their fact check as a fact check of whether the Trump campaign had been accused of using a Nazi symbol, as if there's anything that the Trump campaign hasn't been accused of. They could run a fact check about President Trump being accused of being the Antichrist, and then be able to put a true at the end of the article because he has been accused of being the Antichrist. I once had a nearly endless fight with a guy from California on Twitter who said that Vice President Pence was the equivalent of Joseph Mengele. I guess now USA Today could run a fact check and put a big true in all caps at the bottom of it because Vice President Pence was accused of being the equivalent of Joseph Mengele. And it seems like USA Today would be happy to do that. And most importantly, it would allow them to put the word true at the bottom of the fact check. Do you think that the activists, the campaign workers, and the politicians on the other side are going to spend time explaining that distinction between a fact check as to whether an allegation was true and a fact check as to whether anybody made the allegation? No, they won't. And I think USA Today understands that. And in the interim, USA Today gets to signal its woke, anti-Trump chops to all the left and its fellow members of the media, and it signals to all of us something that's been far too apparent for far too long. Journalism has been dying for decades, but its unhinged reaction to the election of Donald Trump may have killed it off for good. Next topic. The university times, they are a-changin'. If you're like me, you've read a lot of articles recently about universities continuing to teach only online, but not lowering their tuition, even though the online experience really isn't the same as being taught in class. Moreover, from the standpoint of the student, it seems unfair to pay a price based on supporting a facility which isn't even being used. And that's the approach or perspective taken in the articles I read. But I recently read one which approached the issue from a different angle. This one was by economics professor Peter Morici and entitled, How Universities Will Reinvent Themselves for the Better. It was released on July 7 on finance.townhall.com after appearing the day before on MarketWatch. It addresses how universities are reaching out to develop better online delivery of lectures and classes and points to a model used by Apple for business education. Morrissey predicts that once universities develop a blended online model that combines quality online videos, integrated written materials, and direct access online to instructors, the, quote, Caruso effect, close quote, will kick in. I have to admit, I'd never heard the term Caruso effect. It refers to famed opera singer Enrico Caruso and the effect the development of the phonograph had on the music industry. Specifically, as Morrissey points out, when Caruso's music became available on a widespread basis to the public, local music houses featuring local performers were shut down or later turned into movie theaters to accommodate the new motion picture industry. So Morrissey is predicting that the most talented online lecturers will be in the most demand, that the size of online classes could be massive, that the salaries of the professors delivering the best online lectures could grow substantially, but the cost of college should drop. What would be the inevitable result? Huge numbers of professors laid off with the savings used to improve the quality of production and then to reduce tuition. As Morrissey points out, over the last 2 decades, even after accounting for discounts, tuition and fees have risen 172%, compared to healthcare's rise of 99% and overall inflation of just 53% over the same period. If something can't go on forever, it won't, and that level of inflation is unsustainable. So what's going to happen? Consolidation. The lesser-known schools, the lesser-known brands will close. The people who are the stars will rise to the top and be paid based on their performance because they'll become an attraction for the schools for which they teach. Think for a moment about some of the professors you had in college, the differences between the best and the worst. I recall, and the differences were stark. Now imagine some of the best lecturers on YouTube. Think about a professor as engaging and enlightening and entertaining as Jordan Peterson. Now compare him to the most boring professor you had in college. The previously unknown Jordan Petersons of the world are going to climb. They'll be in demand. Their pay will spike and the size of their online classes will climb even more. The boring professor that sits at the front of the room and reads from the textbook, I actually had one who did that, will be in deep trouble. This is going to be disruptive, but it's inevitable. And for the families who've been struggling to figure out how they're going to send their kids to college without taking on crippling debt, they'll get some much-needed relief. But for those large numbers of professors who can't stand out from the crowd when the consolidation occurs, trouble is coming. There's another negative. Think about how many of the rioters we've seen over the last few weeks might have been disaffected college graduates with unmarketable degrees stuck working at Starbucks or not working at all. Now substitute large numbers of professors left in a similar situation as the universities reinvent themselves. In the end, the message is clear. If you're looking for stability, if you're looking for the pace of change to abate, you're looking at the wrong planet. But there's one thing you can count on to stay the same week after week, and that is that I'll be back next week with another episode of Political Spirits. Be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits and like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits and follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and select all after you hit the bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.